to the 2023 to 2026 series in our Research Video Forum. Welcome to the 2023 to 2026 series in our Research Video Forum. Today, I am very honored to be joined by Dr. Karen Stuart-Röhm, who is going to be joining SUNY New Paltz University as an assistant professor this fall 2024, and will also be continuing in her role as associate researcher at the University of Pretoria. Welcome. So glad to have you here today.
Thanks very much.
So let's dive right into your research. That's what you're here for today. So I wondered if you could just tell us a little bit about your research or your research experiences.
So I think my research experience obviously started when I was doing my master's, and I really focused on qualitative research around the relationship between caregivers and people with dementia with whom they were working. And that led to my interest in creating a pilot study in about 2015. I wasn't affiliated to any university. It was really just my own desire to do some research, and that was spurred on by some readings I'd been doing at the time about caregivers singing, and thought, this sounds wonderful. I wonder how it could look in South Africa and whether this could be something that could really contribute to how caregivers interact, especially cross-culturally, with the residents with dementia. So I did a very small pilot study. Again, it was qualitative. And I had this therapeutic singing workshop that I'd kind of created over the years, and did this with a group of caregivers and had interviews with them, and analyzed a few videos of their interactions with residents. And that in itself then led to thinking, well, maybe there's a PhD in there that I could make it a bit more official. So yeah, in 2020, I started at University of Melbourne with my PhD, and that really focused on, it was an action research. I'm quite a pragmatist. Pragmatism is something I really enjoy. I also really enjoy mixed methods. So I did a mixed method study looking at the co-design of a person-centered caregiver singing protocol, and specifically a training protocol. And I worked alongside caregivers at the time and got their feedback through iterations of doing this workshop and interviews and the workshop and interviews. And we kind of, outcome was this workshop that we felt was really clinically relevant for caregivers here in South Africa. And then I did a feasibility and acceptability study with quite a large cohort of caregivers, around 40 to 45 caregivers across 7 different care homes. And that really yielded some really positive results in, surprisingly, not only just what they noticed in the residents themselves, but also what they noticed in themselves, and how the music really contributed to their positive experiences of caregiving, which I think is really, really meaningful, especially what we know about the difficulties and the challenges that carers can really experience while caring for someone with dementia. So and that was mixed methods, as I say, leaning more towards qualitative, but I did do some statistical analysis of Likert questionnaires. So that's been my experience so far. And of course, outside of that, as a research supervisor, having my fingers in some of the master's therapy research projects that they were doing and dissertations, and being involved in that has also really exercised my research brain.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for describing all that. I mean, it's very near and dear to me, being a researcher in dementia and having worked with caregivers. I think one thing that's significant about your research is, centering the voice of the participant, right? So really wanting to learn about that experience for the caregivers as well.
Yes. Yes.
Fantastic.
I think it's nice to lean towards that, because a lot of research really focuses on the impact on the resident themselves or the person with dementia. And I felt that it was a little bit, some of the focus on the caregivers was a bit missing. And, as a music therapist, I can run sessions at a care home, and it's 40 minutes a week, 45 minutes a week, but the caregivers are there all the time. And I really felt that this could be something, or music therapists had something to share with them that would be beneficial for how they interacted with and engaged with and could connect with someone with dementia. So that was a lot of the motivation around why I did this PhD and the research there.
I mean, I can only speak really from a Canadian and US perspective in terms of caregivers here, and they are really an under-researched and under-supported
Oh,
demographic. And
definitely.
is that similar to your experience in South
Very
Africa?
much so. Yeah. I think we sit with quite a dearth of research in general in terms of dementia and the field of dementia. Um, so there really is very, very little on caregivers' experiences of dementia, of taking care of someone with dementia.
Mm.
Um, and that I could find was really about the negatives and the
Mhm.
challenges, the lack of support, not only just in specifically the tasks of caring for someone with dementia, but also difficulties with management and the stress of having to do things on time and the ward routine, and then therefore not being able to take the actual needs of the person into consideration. So it isn't very person centered, still very medical model, um, almost a little bit institutionalized in the way that things are run. So there's a lot of lack of support that they experience, and that has led to a high turnover of caregivers in general. And it does depend on the kind of care home. I mean, there are some very well resourced care homes that are able to better support the caregiver or the carer, but there are some that rely on public funding, and there really isn't scope for continued professional development, and there is no official body that dictates that they should have continued professional development. So they're also unregistered. There's no kind of body. There's also no dementia care plan in South Africa at the moment. So it's really something that's people are trying to start. Um, they're trying to get it up and running, but yeah, there really is very little, unfortunately. Um,
I would imagine that your research is contributing to just a greater understanding of the need for support, right? And to look very
yeah,
holistically at dementia care, right? So not segregating always who we are, providing music therapy for, but considering it as a holistic piece to a care package, right? Where everyone
yeah,
is.
yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if I could just pick up on another thread that you said. So you talked about mixed methods of research, and again, that really resonated with me. What do you think might be the strength, or why are you drawn to a mixed methods kind of approach?
Um, it's so funny how, as a researcher, my leanings have changed. When I did my first research project, as when I was studying occupational therapy, we had to do a dissertation in our fourth year, and I was the one who did all the t-tests and all the statistical analysis, and I'm so drawn to statistics and numbers, and I really enjoy that. But then over the years of doing other research, I was then really drawn to qualitative, and I feel like the mix between the two can be more powerful than just leaning on maybe one of them. I also think it's really helpful, and I felt it was really helpful in terms of South Africa in trying to kind of add credence to this thing called music therapy and how it can benefit people with dementia and the caregivers and the care homes. I needed a little bit more than just the caregivers saying this was nice or they
Right.
enjoyed it. I felt it needed a bit more meaty numbers to
Mhm.
add a different lens to it as well, especially when we're trying to change policy or working with doctors and psychiatrists and geriatricians. They want to know, well, so what? It's nice. Okay, what else? So I thought the marriage between the two for me in this project was really important. Um, I like both as well. If I just think of a personality thing, I'm an all-rounder, so I was drawn to both of them as well.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like the results will have by going with a mixed methods study, that you're also reaching different allied healthcare professionals who might be more
Yes,
drawn to one aspect of it. So
exactly, exactly.
So I wonder, given what you've just said about your research, how does that compare to other projects you know about in different parts of the world, or have other international studies, inspired kind of your work or your directions in research?
Oh, yes. There have been several studies that kind of inspired my initial desire to share skills. And I think there's a lot of research now, especially that is emerging around the benefits of skill sharing in music therapy. I think of Helen Odell Miller, Ori McDermott, who wrote a lot about that. Heng Sood has done a lot. Um, so but my first discovery into this thing called caregiver singing was reading the papers, and I hope I pronounced them correctly. They're Swedish, but Gottal, Hammer, Swal, I don't know their first names, but they're in the nursing field. They're not in the music therapy field. And I read their papers and I thought, oh my goodness, why is there no music therapist in this, number one? And could this be something that we could do here in my context? And that's what actually motivated me to do that initial pilot study. And then after that, I found that it's actually quite a lot around this thing called skill sharing. I know Helen Hannah Ritter has also done quite a lot on that. Felicity Baker's also done some work on that. So yeah, I just started reading all those papers and thought, well, if they can do it, I'm going to try and do it here too. But I needed to make sure that it was something that was very contextualized to us in South Africa. I don't think this is unique to us in South Africa, but there are really, challenges around the multicultural nature of care homes, especially of life in general, but in care homes. And so I had to really make sure that whatever I shared with the caregivers was from a lens of how can we contribute this together, which is why I ended up doing co-design. I felt that was imperative here in this context, thinking of myself coming in as the expert, especially because I'm a white woman and a lot of the caregivers are non-white, and I had to come in with we're all learning here, and I have something to say and something to share, but you have something to say and something to share. Together we can create this clinically relevant, acceptable, feasible training and protocol that could work for you. Yeah, so those are the beginning stirrings. And when I was reading all those, I thought, how can that happen here?
Fantastic. I mean, you definitely have named some really important researchers who have contributed a
And
lot.
I can't forget you as well. I mean, you've also
Oh,
got quite a lot on it. Sorry.
yeah. Oh, yeah. No,
Yeah,
I
but
mean,
there's quite a few lately, and I think one of the first ones I also remember reading was Laura Beer's 2016 paper on her skills sharing and how she kind of created it and thought about it. That was also one of the pivotal papers that got me thinking. Um, there's so many.
it's
There's so
true.
many.
We are fortunate in our profession. While there is still so much research to do, there is a lot of great research that has been done, and it's important to
Yes.
celebrate that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you kind of already shared it, but maybe there's a little bit more you want to say about kind of what motivates your research, what gets you excited about doing research, what inspires.
Um, I and I suppose I can go back to what inspired me for this specific research
Mhm.
because I haven't done a lot of research. I'm still very early in the career. But I, being a bit more of a pragmatist, I really want to, I want the research I do to have almost like a grassroots reach. That it on the grassroots level, whether it's for music therapists or other people working in other fields, that it could be really relevant for them, that it's not necessarily just an opinion piece or I want to say, and there's room under the sun for all of it. But for me personally, and in this context, I really wanted to contribute to something that was that could really make a difference on the ground level for music therapists, but also for those that were working with people with dementia or caring for people with dementia. So I enjoy that aspect of clinical relevance. I feel like it resonates with me as well. Um, uh, the other things that motivate me, I mean, definitely the fact that there's very little research in South Africa, and I felt I would love to contribute to that because one of the aims in doing the PhD was to have some credence behind music therapy and also how we can be involved, and what contributions we can potentially have in care homes. Because again, one of the difficulties that we face is that music therapy is seen as a very luxurious or luxury therapy. So there's so few of us doing it, and there are no posts available. You really have to create your own work, and it's a lot of advocacy around music therapy. And again, I don't think we're unique in that as a country, but it is something that also motivated me to do the work, and the research was I needed something meaty to go to a care home or to go to shareholders and partners and say, this is what research in our context can say, and this is the potential, rather than just only having research done in international, or in other nations. It felt important to me.
When you go to speak to a physician or you speak to caregivers or other healthcare disciplines, how is it that you maybe describe the purpose of your research to those that are not music therapists?
Yeah, I tend to speak a lot about the ethos of person-centered care, and how music, in terms of its neurological impact, its physical impact, its emotional impact, and its social connection impact that it can have, how that fits in so nicely and so well with this ethos of person-centered care. So obviously, depending on who I'm talking to, yeah, so I kind of demonstrate how the two go hand in hand. And obviously, person-centered care and relationship-centered care, I kind of can speak about both of those. But that's really important for a care home's environment in terms of enhanced care and delivery of care from caregivers. So, yeah, I tend to marry those two when I'm talking to medical doctors or psychiatrists or the management of care homes, and I speak about how that looks. And then I also obviously add in, I think, the statistics of my research is also very helpful because I can show them on a graph what, visually show them without showing them actual footage of sessions or a resident with a caregiver. I can show them visually, this is what the potential is. Caregivers are saying this, and this is what the quantitative aspects look like. So I think that's been very helpful to be able to say, look, 97% of these caregivers in this research project felt that they were more confident in caregiving. And that's important. You want the caregivers that are, hired in your care home to feel like they know what they're doing and to feel like they can confidently, for their own sake, but also the sake of the resident, and also the sake of managing a care home in terms of the turnover, and caregiver burden and how much support they feel they need. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, definitely demonstrating how what you do is going to have an impact, right, in terms of the different
Definitely.
disciplines, right? So, I mean,
Mm.
sometimes what we do too is looking at, highlighting how, music therapy services to whomever we're providing them to can also offset, other costs, right? So they can be very cost
Yes,
effective, right? And
exactly.
I think that can be
Yes.
so helpful to impart.
Yeah, yeah. I actually just spoke to a group of activities coordinators from several care homes this morning, actually.
Mm.
And they'd asked me to speak on music therapy, but also a little bit about the caregiver singing. And I always start with how music, what is their experience of music? So I think if you can understand how it affects you, and how everyone's really different in how they experience music. And something that I like might not be something that you enjoy. Something that really gets me going might not do the same for you. And so when I'm doing talks or when I'm talking, I always start off with, what is the impact on you? How do you experience it? And then we talk about how generally music is experienced for human beings in terms of our physiology, our physical contributes, our emotional, social, etc. And that always leads nicely into, well, think of someone with dementia that you're caring for. How would they experience that music? Remember how there were so many differences in the room in terms of who liked what. Well, we can't just play the radio and expect, everybody to connect with the music and to connect with us. So yeah, the most important thing for me is to modify yourself to be able to, and your own music experience, and to um, play what the resident enjoys and the resident likes. Yeah, that's just one of the ways that I tend to address, trying to show, why would we do music with someone with dementia. I always started off with, what does music mean for you? It's just, yeah, one of the things I normally add.
It makes a lot of sense. I mean, and it ties into your approach that you've talked about, which is participant centered, right? And person centered care. So here
Yes,
you're centering your caregiver, right? And
exactly. Yeah.
helping music. What's the importance in
Mm-hmm.
their life? Yeah, to really
Yeah.
highlight it. Wonder if we could also look at, just in more generalities, like why do you think music therapy research is important? And how would like what would you say to someone that's, considering or starting, wants to do music therapy research?
Mm. Yeah, as you said, it's almost like there's a juxtaposition of, there's so much research, but there's actually also such little research, because it depends on the population, it depends on what people are looking at, it depends on the context. And as I said, there's very little in South Africa, and I think there are other countries who share that there's very little done in their specific culture and their specific country. Um, I think it's really, really important. There is actually so much to unpack when it comes to music, because of the nature of music and the mystery as well of music and how it impacts us. So that's why I think there's space under the sun for every qualitative, quantitative, mixed methods,
Mhm.
population. If you're looking at something a little bit more high level in terms of opinion pieces, or if you're looking at pragmatism, there is just space under the sun for it all. And if anybody would love to research something, I say, please do. Um, I One of the things I really enjoy is being part of the University of Pretoria master's students sessions where they're explaining their thoughts on what they would like to address. And there are just some amazing, out of the box, I would never have thought to research that. And I think it's wonderful, because they're thinking, yeah, I mean, in terms of South Africa, using sangomas and traditional healers, it's broad, and it's wonderful. So if anyone's thinking of doing research, I would say, find yourself a mentor and go for it. Find yourself a soundboard. I remember when I wanted to do this little pilot study, little old me, not quite knowing what I was really doing, but I just tried to chat to the gurus that I knew around me, and got advice and soundboarded what I wanted to do, and that was incredibly helpful, and that motivated me to continue doing it as well. So yes, do it and find someone to talk to about it.
Fantastic. Well, I mean, it sounds like you're a wonderful mentor in terms of, helping researchers kind of, flesh out their ideas, but then supporting them too, and
Oh
offering.
yes,
Yeah,
yeah, I
I
really
find
enjoy that.
I mean, I find that as a research supervisor as well, that, some of the best, even my own research, some of the best questions, things I've wanted to know about have come from doing clinical work and why something's
Yes,
working or why it isn't working. And I do find that there's just so many pockets of looking at, a phenomenon and looking at what has been done, but still then just seeing that
yeah.
there's lots of gaps.
Yes. Well, I think that's exactly why I got into it. I noticed what was happening in my music therapy groups, and I questioned why it was happening. and it was mostly around the caregiver's interaction with the residents. But why is this happening in this way? How can I better support them to better support the residents? And that spurred on this whole thing. I could see caregivers really not understanding how to communicate with someone with dementia. It would often elicit some of those symptoms of dementia and distressed behaviors. And I just thought, well, this can't continue. And a lot of the caregivers here don't know about dementia. So I agree with you in your clinical work, and that's a wonderful, fertile ground to have questions and to think, but why is this? As you said, why is this working? Why is it not working? What about it is working? And to try and unpack that and to figure that out is exciting. And if you have that question, I'm sure there are others that have that question.
Mm.
So.
I wonder if we could, as we're coming kind of to a close, I wonder if we could just look also at, how do we build more equity, and inclusion into our studies, right? I mean, there's certainly, challenges. And I wonder if you just have some thoughts about how we can build in studies that, do not center, Western research principles or practices and really become a little bit more integrative of other ways of
Yeah.
knowing.
Yes. Oh, it's a big question. Not easy to answer, hey? Um, I While you were asking that, I know this is a little bit sideways to that, but one of the kind of inclusions is the inclusion of the voice of the person with dementia. I know that's not necessarily cultural, but and how can we include that a little bit more? And I know that there's some papers recently that have been published on that, how to interview and how to make sure that it isn't only just the music therapist or the caregiver speaking on behalf of.
Mhm.
I think in other ways of bringing in equity and the non-Western is, I'm loving what I'm hearing in terms of our master students and what they're bringing to the table in terms of their research topics and the questions that they're asking. And it would be wonderful to have that, in terms of the congresses, have that a little bit more audible in
Mhm.
the field, in the realm of music therapy in the world. So it would be maybe focusing on research that's coming out of countries that might not be that Western. Having said that, South Africa is quite Western, and it's also fighting that because the people that I interact with are not always. Yeah, they come from such diverse cultures. And making sure that we are respectful of that, and um, making sure in how I interact with them is respectful of them, but also make sure that how they express themselves and how they think about things comes out, which is again why I wanted to do co-design personally for my
Mhm.
research. Um, yeah, I mean I don't think I can even answer the question in a very concise way. It's a big one. And I
It
still
is.
grapple with it so much.
Well, I think you've given us a start and definitely things to think about,
Yeah.
like, the fact that including the participant and their voice and in the co-design, I think you're already building that inclusion into the design. So that's an
Yeah.
excellent idea for those that haven't maybe considered the importance or value of.
Yeah. Oh, I think for me, something that was really, really important in terms of my journey as a researcher was to read, to read papers, talk to people, go to the congresses, go to conferences, interact with people who were a lot more experienced than I was, and that was really helpful as a very young researcher or someone thinking of getting into research. That's a bit of a practical
Mhm.
piece of advice, and reading. And if you're interested in anything, what has been done, and how do you think you can contribute to that? Whether that's just taking something that, like for caregiver singing, it was happening in Sweden. I thought, well, let's see if it can happen here. So it wasn't like I thought about that out of my head. I had help from reading and interacting with others who'd done some similar things. Um, yeah, and again, clinical work, as I said, is such a good starting point. I don't know if I would have thought of this question by myself had I not been engaged in the clinical work.
Mm-hmm.
And again, like at the end of a day or at the end of a month, or whenever a question pops into your head about, oh, I wonder what this is, or oh, I wonder, as we said, write it down, keep yourself a little notebook of all these cool questions and go and see what's out there to answer that question. And if you don't find much, then maybe that's a good research question for you. And again, I always find, and I'm sure other countries have this as well, but supervision groups and continued professional development groups, that we have them here. That's also a lovely ground to find soundboards and to talk. Yeah, that would be my little small nugget of advice.
Well, I think that's a wonderful nugget in terms of even just, making sure you write down the questions as they come, because you can
Yeah.
definitely be sparked by ideas then or down the road that, as you keep
Yes.
working, will
Yes.
inspire
Yeah.
you, or, you may question more and start reading for sure. Get into
Mm.
reading.
Yes.
Um, Sounds good.
Yeah.
Well, I
Yeah.
thank you very much for your time. I wish you well in your new transition
Thank
to
you.
the United States and to your new role as assistant professor there
Yes.
at SUNY New Paltz. Thank you very much for your
Fantastic.
time today.
Thank you, Amy.